Now, on Monday, a judge at Blackfriars Crown Court asked a woman to stand down from the jury because she was not prepared to remove the veil on Niqab, covering all her head except her eyes. The trial was for an attempted murder, and the judge said it was desirable that the court could see her facial expressions. Is a Niqab a barrier to justice? Barbara, why do you think it is?
Well, the judge was applying judicial guidance, which is given by the Judicial Studies Board for judges in this situation. And what the judge was having to think about was the right of the defendant to a fair trial. And the UK court process is very much based on face-to-face encounters where people call evidence in front of a live jury and a judge, and the jury and the judge have to assess that evidence and decide whose side they prefer. And I think what the judge was thinking about was, well, putting myself in the position of the defendant, how comfortable would I feel giving my side of the story in front of an audience, some of whose faces I couldn't see, and I couldn't see how they were reacting to what I was saying. Do
you have to see all of them? I mean, perhaps people can understand if the entire jury had their faces covered, but 1 out of 11, surely you would get an impression.
Well, it's an all or nothing principle, because that one person's view might be decisive in the discussions in the jury room afterwards. So I think what the judge was trying to do was to ensure a fair trial. It may be, but when that particular lady was called to jury service, it may not have been fully explained to her that the judge reserved the right to consider these issues and to form a view, because he's the judge and ultimately he has to decide these things. And people may not be happy with his decision, but it's his duty to make that decision. So maybe she didn't have that fully explained to her. In other cases, it may not be such an issue.
Myriam Francois Cerrah, if it's all or nothing situation, if it is a point of principle, do you think anybody, whether it be for religious reasons or whatever reasons, should be allowed to cover their face in a courtroom if they so desire? Jedi Knight, whatever.
I think there are very good reasons that might be applicable for asking women to remove the face veil in a court of law, and I think it's a testimony to to the judicial service that there's very fair guidelines in that regard. So I think that's a very positive thing. The only thing really with regard to this case is that I'm not sure that the argument that he wasn't able to read her facial expressions was a particularly legitimate one. That's the only reason really I would take issue with it. I would say, what about my friend who's an excellent poker player and has fantastic poker face? You couldn't read his facial expressions. I'm not certain he would have been asked to leave the courtroom. It also begs the question of a blind judge. You know, is a blind judge unable, therefore, to rule in a case?
And finally, this wasn't a poker game. This was a trial for murder.
No, we're talking about being able to read people's facial expressions. If you're not able to read facial expressions, besides which, it also begs the question of what if you're misreading people's facial expressions? Surely you shouldn't be premising it on your interpretation.
There's been really important evidence.
You said this is not a poker game.
No, it's a court of law. It's a really formal process, and moreover, it's a really important oral tradition which needs respect.
There's no issue with respect. In this country, we have a very fair system, which is based on avoiding the rule of the tyranny of the majority, and we do that by protecting the rights of minorities, and that means allowing them to live out their religious identities to the fullest extent, as long as it doesn't harm others.
Exactly.
In this particular case,
the
question is posed, but I'm not sure this particular case that I was convinced by the judge's reasoning, because I think it rests on the problematization of the face veil in public discourse, so that every time we see it, we think it's an issue.
Which will come on to Barbara.
It wouldn't matter what her reasons were for wearing the veil, whether it was religious or for some other reason. She might have a facial disfigurement, say.
In which case you might not be able to read her facial expressions either. Should she be dismissed upon those grounds?
The judge's opinion is that all the juries are a jury of equal peers. They sit in judgment
evidently
on someone.
not equal peers. She's trying to participate in her civic duty like everybody else, and she's being denied that right.
Let's explore that.
On a basis which isn't the same for everybody else.
There are certain rules in the system in which she wants to engage, and if she wants to sit in judgment, then she must do it in the same way as everybody else.
Sahar,
the judge can also take other steps rather than just asking the jury to stand down. He can ask for any adaptation that the court can actually apply. For example, maybe talking behind a curtain if it's
an issue
giving
of
evidence,
hearing, definitely.
Or
if you're giving evidence, that's different.
If it's facial expression, for example, very, very crucial for the evidence or for the victim, then there is other ways, for example, of video link that they can use in the court.
Special measures.
And only showing to the judge or to who are concerned about it.
If somebody asked you then, if you were serving on a jury, if a judge said, would you remove your veil, would you remove it?
I mean, it depends on the situation. It depends. Each situation has to be considered individually. Sometimes, if it's crucial, very crucial, for the interest of the victim.
Do you think the other jurors should be allowed to see your face as you deliberate in the jury room?
I mean, again, it depends on the situation. If it's really crucial, then yes, it's not a problem to take it off. If it's really, really crucial for the victim interest. Okay.
I mean, I think what you're saying is really interesting because it shows that in circumstances
allow me to bring out Abhijit needs to be done to come in. Yes, international law expert.
I think that the problem here is that you're making a preference for a minority, a system that has to be equal and formal.
Well, shouldn't we do that? Shouldn't we have some cultural allowances in our society?
Not on this front. I think the niqab, going to a broader issue, niqab and the burqa are about female subjugation in a country which had a long history of tradition of female rights, going back to Mary Wollstonecraft 200 years ago. What does it say that somebody walks down the street of Britain today when equality of gender is now, almost a settled issue?
Excuse me,
an issue of
gender lessons.
I feel that this is wrong today. What women of a right mind
this
wear
is a man who believes we should ban
okay, so let's bring Susan.
Should be kept out of the workforce so
Myriam,
we can avoid immigration.
I'd like Susan to come in. You used to. Yeah, it's interesting because he's broadened the issue. He's broadened the issue, and Miriam's not happy.
No,
and I don't think you are either.
I would just like to say, for that point,
so let's hear from Susan.
Sister, are you oppressed, my dear?
Not at all, definitely.
Well, there you go then.
The thing is, I should be, even in the court, I should be given the option or the choice whether to take it off or not. No one
because your religion does not require you to do this. It's a matter of personal
Okay, so wait a minute, please, everyone. We're all speaking at once. I want to explore this a little bit because, and Anthony, I will come to you, and there's some hands in the audience as well. You used to wear it, didn't you, Susan? And you said that you felt incredibly protected.
Yes.
Explain that.
I wore the niqab for a personal, spiritual reason. It's got nothing to do with anybody else. I put it on and I felt special. I felt closer to God. I felt that this was the way that I wanted to express my religious beliefs. And it didn't say anything to anybody else. And I took it off because I began to suffer from abuse, from people spitting at me in the street. I've had stones thrown at me. I mean, I'm quite used to being called names. I don't care about names, but I think
you should care. We should all care that she's been called.
Can I ask you about something else as well? It's the modesty aspect of it. And would you mind, we had a conversation over a very pleasant cup of coffee earlier on, and you were saying that it also takes a certain thing out of the conversation with a male. It takes out you called it the for, a do-her factor.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? It takes that out of the equation, you said. What do you mean?
It's not just men, obviously. I think you're taking away that judgment. I don't want to be walking down the street and have a stranger say to me, or think, well, I'd kick that out of bed, I tell you that. Or I don't really think that's... well, she didn't put her makeup on well today, or she hasn't brushed her hair.
Isn't that a little bit insulting of men to think that all men behave like that?
Yeah. I didn't say just men. I said women as well.
Judgmentalism. Yeah,
and I think mentally we all judge, and I don't want to be judged. I don't want to be judged on my appearance.
Anthony Clavane.
I think it's all about choice and a woman's right to choose. And I think what we've just heard is that women have a right to choose whether they want to wear it or they don't. And the tradition that my friend has been talking about, this great tradition of Mary Wollstonecraft and feminism, is actually about women having the right to choose. And if women here are saying, we want to wear it, we are proud of our democratic tradition that says, yes, you can wear it, and we should be tolerant, and that Britain is based on tolerance.
Good morning, what would you like to say?
Hi, can I just say that I'm a Muslim as well, I'm quite more Western, but I agree with the fact the reason why they're wearing niqab. In Islam it says not compulsory, but it's their choice and they're encouraged to make the choice of human rights, choose whether they want to wear it or not. But in which legislation or which policy does it state that you are entitled not to wear a certain item or you have to remove a certain item? Where does it state that you've got to remove a certain item of clothing?
But you're not allowed to wear a crash helmet or a balaclava.
Then you shouldn't be able to you can come into other cultures like remove a turban, remove a Jew's hat.
You can see the face.
You can go into a multicultural society. Well, why is it that it's a barrier just to Islam and justice?
And yes, lady there. Good morning.
Yes, hello. I mean, I speak as a magistrate, and we deal with these issues, kind of daily. And, I believe in women's rights. I'm a woman myself. I've worked for women's rights. I've just come from the Commission on the Status of Women, where we're working for women's rights and the right to choose. But in a court situation, one of the difficulties that we have is that people cannot be identified, and if their faces are covered. And this is an issue for us as magistrates and accusers, people who are accusing. I'm not necessarily we don't work with a jury in a magistrate's court, but certainly witnesses. If a person is actually making an accusation against somebody or they're a witness, the person who is the defendant has a right to know who that is and to
I agree with that. I agree with that. We all agree. We all agree on that.
Michael Johnson.
I totally agree with that. I believe that, if you're going into the court of law, and the judge asks you to remove your niqab, then I don't see a problem with that. We are living in the United Kingdom, and he's part of our judge and jury. I can't go over to Dubai and do what I would like to do. That's their country, and I have to respect.
What would you like to do, Michael?
These are English citizens.
Well, you're not allowed to do certain things in Dubai, and obviously I have to abide by that. Yeah. And if I go into the court there and they tell me to do, I have to do it.
Michael, they're not foreign. They are British. They're your fellow citizens here talking. They're not foreigners from Dubai. They're entitled to have an opinion on how their judicial service is run. The issue here is we should point out that there is a unanimity here on the fact that if a judge asks for legitimate reasons for the niqab to be lifted, that people ought to lift it. Everyone here agrees. The young woman in this particular case said, fine, I'll leave. It wasn't even a problem. It is us as a society problematization of this discourse. We're making the niqab into this major issue when it's not. And you're suggesting that you deal with it daily. I mean, I find it hard to believe there are 0.3% or less of women in this country who actually wear it. The suggestion that it's a major problem facing us is masking very serious issues we should be tackling.
I think Michael's hit the nail on the head. I think this is about, what are traditional values of openness and transparency in British culture. And I think that when we have new cultures coming in over the last 50 years because of mass immigration, it is up to them to change to what the standards of this country are. It is not about everyone changing for the minority.
But isn't it? Don't we cherish the traditions in this country as well? I saw your hand. I'll come to you in a moment or two. Don't we cherish the traditions of freedom of expression? Isn't this a manifestation of freedom of expression?
No, because men don't wear burqas or niqabs. You see, this is about gender. This is a specific gender stigmatisation issue. And this is why I say
Sahar, can I explain something here? First of all, we have to know that wearing the niqab is an act of worship before a modesty. Okay, so I am wearing my niqab to freely practice something that I truly and deeply believe in, and I think I should have the right to practice it. Then the modesty come as a second reason for it. So that is different between men and women. For me, it's just an act of worship.
And what about these? If I can explore this, because it's good to sort of try and seek the enlightenment through discourse, as you say, and to remove the problematization, which is the word you used several times this morning.
Yes.
When we see somebody who's completely covered up walking along the street, a woman with her husband, and he's wearing the loafers and the designer jeans and the open-neck short-sleeved shirt, why isn't he being modest?
It's his choice.
Sorry?
That's his choice. He's chosen
But
not to do that.
there's an inconsistency of modesty in that.
They're two different people. They're two different people with a totally different relationship to God, and they have both chosen a different way. And because my sister here is in niqab, don't think that she's any better a Muslim than my sister over there who's not in a hijab at all.
This is about a cultural practice that treats women differently.
It's not a cultural practice.
Or a religious practice that treats, even if it's a religious practice, we should not treat women differently to men. They should be treated equally.
You want to resurrect the tradition of Enoch Powell in this country. What are you talking to us about?
One at a time, Myriam, what are you saying?
I think that we have to be open, that the traditions of this country, women do not cover themselves.
Freedom of expression is a tradition of this country.
This is not about freedom of expression. This is about saying that women are different to men. I think that is fundamentally wrong. We have to.
I think
John Amaechi.
I think you have to be really careful. As an atheist, perhaps I don't have a place to even talk on this issue. But I would say this. We have to be very careful when we pontificate about the traditions of any country, because frankly, if you look back in our history, and you don't have to go very far in Britain, all of a sudden some very, very ugly things come about. All of a sudden the idea that some cultures subjugate women becomes absurd, because you don't have to look very far back in our own culture to realize, in our own history, to realize we did exactly those same things.
But there's a reason why Britain doesn't do that anymore, and that's because we've had the Enlightenment. We put religion in its box, and we've decided that religious values do not affect all aspects of our society and our political discourse. And this is an example of a minority which hasn't gone through that process of enlightenment, of of David Hume, Adam Locke, the whole idea of the modern Western life.
About what the Enlightenment was about.
John Locke. Adam Smith, John Locke.
Adam Locke was a new one. Khola.
It was probably the Muslim community in Spain that introduced the Enlightenment to Western Europe. I think it's really to wake up about Enlightenment and Islam not being enlightened. And also, if you just want to look
in Saudi
at
Arabia, there's a cleric in Saudi Arabia who said that this does not go, the niqab does not go. He's a leading cleric, and I've got his name written down somewhere, Mohammed al-Habadad, that's his name. He said that this does not go far enough. He said a woman should only show one eye.
Yes.
How enlightened is that?
There are very misogynistic scholars within the Muslim community, but may I just say that what you just said, that you've got British women, girls, walking around wearing not even shorts, but their underwear in public the minute summer hits the street. And the boys are not walking around in their underwear, they're not in their Speedos, they've got proper trousers and shirts on, and girls have been sexualized to a completely insane position in our country, highest rate of teenage pregnancy, where girls think that they cannot walk down the street until they've got every
But that's also freedom of choice, isn't it?
Yeah, but we're not complaining about them, are we? If a girl comes in a miniskirt as a juror and sits there, nobody's going to ask that you are sexualizing the jury. And secondly, can I say that witnesses, if somebody is giving witness in court, if somebody is giving witness, or is a defendant, or whatever, yes, it makes sense that we need to be able to see their face, but a juror who is actually listening and making a decision does not need to be making any sort of facial comment.
Actually, I totally disagree. If you've ever been in front of an audience and tried to persuade them, you need to see how they're reacting to what you're saying. And if one person's face is covered, then they've got an unfair relationship with the person who's being tried. And the person who's being tried, their rights are really paramount in that process, because they could go to jail. Their lives could be destroyed by what goes on.
There was a case,
so that's
actually.
why it's important in court, because the juror is a kind of judge, and they are performing a public function.
There was a case, actually, Barbara. I think this is pertinent to what you're saying. Myriam or Khola, whoever wants to address this, or either Sahar or Susan, there was a case a few years back, I think it was 2010, where a woman had been abused by her partner and she wore the niqab, and it was required that she take it off in court, and she didn't want to take off her niqab in court to testify. Now, surely by keeping it on, that was an impediment to justice, wasn't it?
Or rather, was she giving evidence against her husband?
She had to take it off in the end, yeah.
No, but was she giving evidence against her husband?
Yes, she was.
The point?
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense, because if they want to, I don't know, show any signs of emotional scarring, as I just said, if anybody is giving evidence, then it makes absolute sense. It's the juror that doesn't make sense to me, where they are listening and taking in information.
Barbara.
The juror is deciding.
Okay, Barbara.
The juror is deciding, and the juror is playing a public function. So it's not like, going along to meet your friends in the pub or playing the poker game, whatever it is. You're performing a public function. And if the rule is... I'm sorry. What a juror does is really important, and we fought very hard to keep the jury.
I don't recall ever having eye contact with the judge. In fact, we never conversed with him. We went into a separate room as a jury, and we conversed. We had no eye line. We sat to the left of him.
The jury is supposed to be impartial. And in fact, the idea that you could be perhaps a defendant who's being looked at by someone's going, don't like the look of that, and it's not the role of the judge to go, right, she pretty much she thinks he's guilty and she thinks he's guilty. That's not the job. And remember, the judicial guidelines do say only if the defendant has a problem with it.
Let's hear
or the
Barbara.
prosecution.
Barbara.
Or the prosecution.
Let's hear your response to that.
Or the prosecution, because it depends what the case is about. Both sides in the adversarial process are entitled to know how the people whom they are trying to persuade are reacting, and covering your face is not acceptable, I'm afraid.
I promise to come to this lady here.
We've moved back onto it now, but we seem to be conflating two different arguments. And one is the argument of the freedom of women to wear what they want when they're walking down the street. And the other is a freedom in court. Now, court has certain conventions. We spoke earlier about girls walking down the street in next to nothing. We wouldn't expect a judge to accept somebody walking into the court in a bikini and thinking that that was okay. There are certain conventions in court, and one of the conventions in court is that justice is meant to be transparent in all but cases where somebody's physical well-being is at issue. So sometimes people can testify from behind a screen, but that's usually people who are testifying, who are scared, who are threatened in some way.
Yes,
it's about
exactly.
Such as a woman who's just been
It's about choice.
Myriam.
Well, I think, you know, although we are arguing, we do actually agree on a lot here, which is that the guidelines are very good. They're very detailed, they're very nuanced, they allow for many different scenarios. And broadly speaking, we're saying that in certain situations, apart from the jury where there may be different views on that, and that again is to the discretion of the judge and possibly other members of the court, broadly speaking, yes, women should have their faces visible just as men should in courts. It's very small cases in which we're talking, and there should be allowances.
I think it's important to mention that a jury is supposed to be a jury of your peers. And if you're going to say that niqab women are not allowed on a jury because of their veil, then you are taking away a section of society that is a peer to someone in court.
If
I was a niqab woman, I would
Barbara,
be
last word to Barbara.
Wait.
Last word, Barbara.
I think that if women serving on a jury in a public function make that choice that they would prefer to pursue their personal wish to cover their face to performing the public function, that that's their choice, but they can't perform the public function then.
Thank you all very much indeed.